When did I ever say Russia would never invade Ukraine? And Russia's not going to invade Ukraine. We haven't been incorrect about anything we've said surrounding Russia and Ukraine this entire time. We have not been incorrect. Russia does not want to invade Ukraine. Russia's not going to invade Ukraine. I never said that that's not going to happen. This Ukraine says they're not going to invade. Russia says they're not going to invade. It's the State Department conspiracy theory. We never said that there was never going to be an invasion. And anyone who says that is just, again, lying. Germany and France have spoken out against these lies that Russia is going to invade Ukraine. But what I'm saying is, I never said that that's not going to happen. Claiming that Russia is going to invade, that's not going to happen. We haven't been incorrect, and we've given more historical context and analysis than anyone else covering this subject, so I'm proud of that. This tweet says, Russia, we aren't going to invade Ukraine. Ukraine, Russia isn't going to invade. The media, they say war is imminent in Ukraine, war is imminent, arm Ukraine, and get them fighting. So, yes, this is a base take. Yes, we should give credit where credit is due. Yes, we should not shit on Candace Owens for having a good take. This is factually correct. We never said that there was never going to be an invasion. I showed you this clip a few days ago saying Putin wants peace, and I explained why he wants peace and why he was not planning to invade Ukraine, as so many in the Western press were saying he was going to do. So many like Jake Sullivan said that it was imminent, and Ned Price says it was without a doubt a certainty. I made the case here that no, Putin is not going to invade Ukraine. And if you didn't believe me, that's why I played this clip to show you.
They played up, for a month practically. They're saying Russia's going to invade Ukraine. Russia's going to invade Ukraine, all to basically try to tie Russia's hands so they could go in and slaughter these people. That's what was happening, folks. All right, for the last month, they've been beating this drum. Russia's going to invade Ukraine. Russia's going to invade Ukraine. Russia's going to invade Ukraine. And it didn't. It hasn't invaded Ukraine. I mean, at this point, there has been no invasion. Why did they say that? It was a strategy. They wanted to play up this idea, get the whole world psyched up. Russia's going to invade Ukraine. They sat there and they faked out the world. Russia's about to invade Ukraine. Russia's about to invade Ukraine. Russia's about to invade Ukraine. Does everyone hear this? Russia's about to invade Ukraine. Hey guys, Russia's about to invade Ukraine. Russia's going to invade Ukraine. Did everyone hear us say this?
It would be quite an interesting beginning of the new multipolar era of world history for a simultaneous intervention for Russia in Ukraine and China in Taiwan. And that would be a rather beautiful...
17 minutes.
And it is so unbelievably stupid. Russia has made it abundantly clear since these allegations started that they have no intention of invading Ukraine.
So, big part of the Ukraine military is neo-Nazis, for real, right? And it's called the Azov Battalion is one of them. And I think the number 2 guy in charge in Ukraine is a freaking neo-Nazi. And so they're fighting right over here. Let me just finish this video. And they've been fighting over here since 2015. They've been shelling 14,000 people, and the people here all speak Russian.
Now, President Putin made another big move. He's ordered Russian soldiers to go into the separatist areas. He says they're peacekeepers.
We've been speaking to.
So, has he ordered soldiers into those areas?
There's discussion of it. The Russian Duma has authorized force if necessary, but those photographs were not of any official Russian forces operating within the Donbass region. There is currently no evidence that Russian forces have entered the Donbass region.
So the neo-Nazi Ukraine regime has been shelling and terrorizing those people in Donbass. And so what Putin did was recognize that area as its own separate country now, right? And so that's going to could trigger a war between Russia and Ukraine. They engineered a coup of the democratically elected government in Ukraine and replaced it with a neo-Nazi regime. And I'm not making that up.
3 hours later.
Russia overnight launched its long-anticipated attack on Ukraine, striking military posts across the country. An unprovoked war in Europe is now underway.
So it's so absurd when people say, oh, Putin is attacking an independent and sovereign Ukraine. It is a U.S. neo-colony. That is all it is. I mean, that doesn't justify, that would in itself justify an attack on it. But let's do away with this idea that Ukraine is somehow independent. And we can talk about how peaceful it is, too. It's far from that either.
So let's just play a little bit of the hypocrisy after you know the history.
Canada and our allies will defend democracy. We are taking these actions today to stand against authoritarianism.
So that's funny. And then the establishment got their butt buddy Bernie Sanders. Bernard Sanders is a very good boy. He said Vladimir Putin's latest invasion of Ukraine is an indefensible violation of international law, regardless of whatever false pretext he offers. There's always been a diplomatic solution to this situation. Tragically, Putin appears inept on rejecting it. It's literally the United States is the people who aren't negotiating, just like Trudeau wouldn't even meet with the protesters to ask what their demand were.
No, he went into hiding.
He went into hiding. Same thing. It's the Ukraine and the United States that doesn't want to negotiate. And I want to show you the level of meddling just to get you. This is from Yasha Levine's sub.
So Putin, he gave an enormous speech in his office, which is very different from what they were telling you, right? They were saying that there's going to be some huge invasion and Putin is going to mobilize 190,000 troops and he's going to take out the energy grid and he's going to put some puppet government in Kiev and all of these weird things, right? They had all these extreme scenarios. I wouldn't be surprised if someone accused him of that he was going to use nukes. And the invasion of Ukraine was basically just Putin sitting in his office, giving a rant for 1 hour. And he went through the whole history of it, right? He starts with Lenin and he starts going through the entire history of Russia and Ukraine and the Soviet Union. And his point is basically that, this is Russia. And Ukraine owes its existence. It's basically its DNA is Russian fundamentally. Okay. And I'm just going to play you a short clip of what he was saying. Okay.
But if you're somebody who believes that this war is so cataclysmic, that it's like Hitler, that it's the worst thing that's happened since, the invasion of Czechoslovakia, that it's going to be the thing that undoes the entire international rule-based order, whatever you think about it, you should be really angry, I think, with the United States for not having done more to try and reach a solution. Now, you might say, oh, it was just a pretext. Putin didn't really care about NATO. Even if we had given him that, he still would have invaded Ukraine. Maybe. We'll never know that counterfactual. But I still don't understand why you wouldn't want the United States to do everything it could to diplomatically avert what is clearly a cataclysmic war. As for the claim that, well, now there's a full-scale invasion, so it proves that Putin's concern wasn't really NATO, I don't really understand how one follows from the other. In part because I don't think it's clear yet that conquest of Ukraine, all of Ukraine, is actually the Russian goal, even though they're bombing places outside of those two territories. There are military reasons why you might do that, even if your ultimate goal is still just the emancipation of those two territories. But even if they do end up occupying Ukraine and conquering Ukraine and doing regime change in Ukraine, how does that prove that the alleged fear that Putin had or the threat he perceived from NATO expansion wasn't real? And again, nobody in Western capitals for the last 15 years denied that that was a genuine fear. Of course it's a genuine fear if you're the Russians. And what I found so notable about what William Burns said, the current CIA director, in the letter that he wrote to Condoleezza Rice in 2008 was he had gone to Russia and spent many months there. And what he said was, the thing that really impressed me was the idea that NATO expansion into Ukraine is a grave threat to Russia isn't something reserved or confined just to Putin or to his hardline advisors. You hear it from what he called the knuckle draggers and the deep recesses of the Kremlin. But he also said you hear it from the most thoughtful and enlightened liberal opponents.
And let's explain more thoroughly this fighting that's been ongoing since the coup. I mean, the toppling of the government didn't mark the end of the violence. The fighting continued until the invasion. So, for people who are living in these disputed regions, which was Donetsk and Luhansk, that Donbass is central to, that fighting never stopped. I mean, I was shocked to learn that 14,000 people had died since the coup in these regions, that the Ukrainian military has been taking pretty severe action, fighting the Russian-backed separatists, far-right nationalists fighting Russian-backed separatists in these regions, getting arms funneled to them by Russia and, of course, by the U.S. I mean, the U.S. government has been openly as well as covertly. I mean, I just saw a clip from Adam Schiff basically bragging about how we've used Ukraine to fight Russia over there. So we don't have to fight them here. I mean, bragging about the fact that we are using Ukraine for a proxy war to literally fight Russia and funneling millions of dollars in lethal weaponry that, of course, was crossing another red line. Then you see Biden, because of the amassing of Russian troops in this region, Biden taking that other dramatic stance where he sent more weapons, the quote unquote lethal aid that was parroted uncritically from the media. Anti-tank weapons, all of these things protested vehemently by Moscow. Let's talk about how this escalated the already fraught tensions, how it broke down the negotiations. But first, can you speak to the Nazi presence today in terms of their control in the government and armed forces? I think war can only be accepted as an absolute last resort. And I'm not afraid to say that while I understand the central role of the U.S. in creating this tinderbox, I still condemn any illegal invasion of another country. And I think as leftists, we shouldn't be afraid to say, this is wrong. This is a violation of international law, that a standard of law needs to be applied equally to every country in the world. And I think that's consistent with progressive values, to be repelled by bombs and troops entering a country when it absolutely did not have to happen. And while I fully recognize and understand Russia's security concerns, I am afraid that this is going to escalate tensions, that this action could lead to a potentially catastrophic conflict. And, there's this weird tendency, and I think maybe it has to do with just this glorification of war, the culture that militarism is baked into American society. And especially as anti-imperialists, I think that justifiably so, I reflexively tend to defend countries that are under attack from the US empire. But I think it's important to not reflexively take the PR of a huge capitalist country. I mean, basically using this line of denazification, right? I think it is very clear to me, at least, that this is not necessarily about denazifying Ukraine. It's about Russia stepping in and saying, we're not going to fucking take this anymore. We are going to assert ourselves on the world stage. And it's okay to have criticisms of that, attitude and policy. And to just not kind of blindly have this celebratory stance that this is all good and we need to just reflexively defend what Russia is doing. I feel like there has to be a nuanced discussion where we give oxygen to many facets on the left. And this includes people in the communist parties in Russia. It includes leftists who I'm sure are protesting the invasion in the streets right now. And I want to get into that too, Brian, but I also want to get into what Putin's speech actually detailed. His speech announced this military operation, and it was very surreal because it's very hard to find the transcript in Western media.
Trey, thank you. And joining me now is Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald. Glenn, we've heard a lot over the last year, just since Biden became president, of the rules-based international order. And the rules-based international order would keep the emerging nations in the world and those that were developed together to avoid unnecessary chaos. How are the rules-based international order folks thinking tonight, do you think?
Well, obviously, it calls into question the entire system on which we rely to avoid catastrophic wars. The idea, though, that simply abstract ideas of a rules-based international order can prevent countries from going to war when they perceive it in their need and their necessity to do so has always been a fantasy.
Glenn?
The way that war...
Glenn, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I wouldn't do this if it weren't for the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, who's joining us now. President Trump, thank you.
So that's a drone. Presumably this is by Russian air defense. This is fucking weird, man. Yeah, it looks like a false flag to me. This looks like a fucking false flag. It looks like there might be like some false flags and some real stuff, and we don't know, right? Yeah, Mariupol is getting hammered by Grad rockets. There's so much disinformation coming out of this.
Hinge stuff from Mr. Jake Huger, but just particularly dumbfounding this morning. What's your reaction to this, Glenn?
I mean, Cenk, you know, I think sometimes we avoid talking about the importance of stupidity in our discourse because it seems so like harsh and rude to describe somebody else as being intellectually stunted, but sometimes it's like unavoidable. Like there's not you can't even, it's not even like it doesn't even rise to the minimal level of intellectual cogency to be able to dissect or analyze, in part because no one nobody is defending the Russian invasion of Ukraine or defending Putin in any way, or attempting to bring some geopolitical reality to the situation about what it is that we might have done to contribute to it or made it worse and what we can do now to try and avoid escalation. But nobody is applauding Vladimir Putin or cheering Vladimir Putin. Even Trump, you know, commented and said, I think it was shrewd how he, you know, didn't go the full invasion before he did and only acknowledged the independence of these two. Like, he praised the savviness of it, but he also was quick to add, had I been president, I never would have allowed this. This never would have happened. It's very sad that Biden allowed it. So even Trump, the kind of only example you could find to claim of somebody who actually admires or defends Putin in this case, was saying what Putin did was bad and I would not have allowed it. But to impose this racial framework on it, as for the claim that, well, now there's a full-scale invasion, so it proves that Putin's concern wasn't really NATO, I don't really understand how one follows from the other, in part because I don't think it's clear yet that conquest of Ukraine, all of Ukraine, is actually the Russian goal, even though they're bombing places outside of those two territories. There are military reasons why you might do that, even if your ultimate goal is still just the emancipation of those two territories. But even if they do end up occupying Ukraine and conquering Ukraine and doing regime change in Ukraine, how does that prove
towards this was a false flag or this was some sort of a Ukrainian military operation in an effort to, you know, stoke fear? We don't have the evidence though yet, but based on the very limited information we have, I'm leaning towards that.
Exist and whatever building.
What people are asking me why I think this might be a false flag. I don't know if this is a false flag, but here's why I'm still not convinced for anything, is because if this was a Russian attack on Ukraine, they wouldn't be trying to put two and two together. They wouldn't be trying to draw conclusions and make you infer things or imply things, rather, with their tweets and coverage of this. They would say, Russia just bombed Ukraine. Russia just bombed Kiev. This just happened. They wouldn't say explosions heard in Kiev. Now, maybe they don't want to jump to conclusions, and that's why they're saying explosions heard, but if my years of following U.S. mainstream media can serve as any sort of a background or indication as to what we're seeing today, I find it very hard to imagine that Russia would bomb Ukraine and the mainstream press would not be directly reporting that this was a bombing led by Russia on Ukraine. It looks more like a false flag.
I'll remember the war.
Donbass, the republics, the breakaway republics, they've been under heavy assault. Tens of thousands of people have been displaced. Thousands of people have died in this so-called civil war, which is really all about this far-right government attacking the eastern section of the country, which does not want any part of this far-right regime. It doesn't want any part of being completely cut off from Russia. It doesn't want any part of this anti-Semitic, anti-Russian agenda of the government in Ukraine, and it doesn't want any part of NATO. And that is why there is all of this controversy about Putin recognizing these breakaway republics. It's not because of concern for Ukraine. It's because the United States wants to see this so-called civil war reach the conclusion that it wants, which is the complete pummeling of the entire the entire country, right? The complete overthrow and overtaking of the entire country so that it can firmly sit in the US's camp. But Ukraine is divided now. And Vladimir Putin's message that he supports these breakaway republics and their autonomy and independence is a political move based on reality. It's based on the fact that they've already been treated as such by Ukraine's government, and now the danger is as such, where it necessitates real political support from Russia.
And what they say is that we don't have any plans to invade. The only circumstance in which we would intervene is if there is another attack on the Donbass that crosses our red line, which is what the whole thing is about here. It's not about a Russian invasion. It's about forcing Russia. The U.S. wants Russia to invade. That's what all this is about. The U.S. wants Russia to intervene in eastern Ukraine so they can impose brutal sanctions and potentially cut off the Russian economy from SWIFT, which would be like the end of Russian commerce with Europe. Europe has come out openly. The German and French governments have come out openly, said they do not want to disconnect the Russian economy from the SWIFT system because Germany wants to import very cheap Russian gas through the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which, by the way, is already built, and all it's waiting is German certification. And this is a last-ditch effort by the hardcore anti-Russia hawks in the U.S. government, specifically Antony Blinken, Victoria Nuland. These are people who orchestrated the 2014 coup in Ukraine in the Obama State Department. And this is their last-ditch effort to sabotage the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to prevent Germany and France from forming close economic relations with Russia and, by extension, China. Macron just had a phone call with President Xi of China, in which he called for increasing French and Chinese relations, especially in terms of the economy. Like a lot of these countries in Europe, they don't necessarily have such insanely anti-Chinese views. And some of them actually don't want negative relations with Russia. If you look at polls in Germany, a lot of Germans want better relations with Russia. And the reality is that this is a last-ditch effort by the U.S. to force this NATO bloc discipline over Europe to prevent Europe from increasing its economic and political relations with Russia and China, because the U.S. can't wage a Cold War against Russia and China if its key allies are major economic partners of Russia and China who rely on Russian energy exports and rely on Chinese trade.